Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great.
Yes, Cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
Welcome to our AM session, a discussion of the Oregon House Bill 3400, its evolution, its effect on both recreational and medical marijuana. My name is Russ Belville. I'm the Executive Director of Portland NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana chapters here in Portland. Joining us on the panel today, we have Don Morse, and we have Nikki Terzia, thank you. Yeah. I was going to say something else. The Game of Thrones name. So whatever. And we have Anthony Taylor joining us as well. And each of them experts in various aspects of this, but I think they would do a better job explaining that background than I would. So let's start with Don. Tell folks who you're involved with, how you got to be working on this 3400. What's your background, basically?
Well, okay. I own the Human Collective here in Portland, dispensary, and secondly, I'm chairman of the Oregon Cannabis Business Council, and that's how I got involved in the political end of things. We created the council to promote the needs of the marijuana community.
All right, and Nikki?
Thank you. I'm Nikki Terzia. I'm actually the principal lobbyist for the Oregon Cannabis Business Council. I've been working in state legislative politics for almost a dozen years at this point in policy and politics. And one of our primary focus and primary functions this legislative session was obviously the Joint Committee on Implementing Measure 91. So working with Don and the members of the Cannabis Business Council had a great opportunity to help shape the legislation that we're here to discuss today.
All right, thank you, Nikki. And Anthony Taylor?
Yes, Anthony Taylor. I am the legislative liaison and co-founder from Compassionate Oregon, which is a patient advocacy group formed in 2013, I guess, to advocate for patients in the legislature. That was a session that we got PTSD added to the list of conditions and got some sentencing reform, and then continued to work down there. I originally came to the legislature in 1983 to advocate for cannabis law reform through the Portland State Political Science Department, and then in '85 the Oregon Marijuana Initiative Organization hired me to lobby in Salem, so I was like one of the first people paid to lobby for pot in Oregon. And so here we are now at the end of the 2015 session with a whole new bunch of pages of law, looking to a whole bunch of pages of rules to follow closely behind, and see what it brings and how it changes the face of marijuana in Oregon.
All right, now we have thank you, yes.
I meant to clap when you mentioned getting PTSD on there, but I had my coffee in my hand, so.
Very well.
Thank you.
And we have a special opportunity here in that we have a nice cozy intimate audience, if you could say, and we can get to questions and answers a whole lot quicker. But just to set the stage, we'll talk briefly about the basics of 3400. We'll talk about how it's affected, how we're looking forward to it affecting medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and maybe just a little background on how we got through 3400. I'll begin with just some overview. Of course, Measure 91 passed with 56% of the vote, the greatest total of any of the 4 states that have passed legalization so far. And it contained a lot of provisions that then ended up getting changed by this 3400, a change in the taxation, a change in medical marijuana limits, a change in extract versus concentrate definitions, many things that we can get to and I'm sure have been covered in some of the other panels. But getting from A to B, from Measure 91 through 3400, was one of the most interesting political wranglings I've ever had the opportunity to report on. Very interesting things happening, not the least of which, in my view, was what I call the West Idaho Compromise. The idea that if you really, really don't like a statewide initiative, you don't have to follow it. We'll come up with a special rule for you, and that is those eastern counties that voted greater than 55% have the right to do bans on not just recreational, but medical marijuana that we weren't even voting on in Measure 91. And they can do so through their city council or county commission without a vote of the people. With Portland Normal, that's one of the things we find most egregious about this 3400 is this, it's kind of a mockery of democracy. It's like, do they get to have Governor Richardson now? Do they get to have Senator Webby now because they voted that way? But that's another topic for another panel. Let me go to Nikki on this because describe for us a little bit about how this came together, because a joint committee was formed. We have both the House and Senate working on this, and they ran into all sorts of roadblocks with the politics on this. Can you just give us some background?
Sure, thanks, Russ. The Joint Committee on Implementing Measure 91 was formed, 5 members from the House, 5 members from the Senate. These bicameral or joint committees are meant to be able to fast track legislation, which if you were following any of this conversation, you'll know absolutely did not happen. The fast track would be probably one of the antonyms of the outcome. And the roadblocks, Russ, I would say the roadblock was they were themselves. In some part, you had such a split ideology around what that was. You had implementation of the measure, the strict implementation. Well, in order to do that, we need to adhere to a Cole memo. What does that mean for changes to the medical marijuana system? And then you had, of course, the will of the voters. And I think the will of the voters was tossed around, a phrase that was tossed around fairly often, but you'd have to look a little bit deeper as to what that meant. For Ted Ferrioli, senator from Malheur County and the eastern half of the state, the will of the voters, as Russ was noting, was quite different than the will of the voters for Ken Helm, who was coming from, Metro Portland area, and Peter Buckley, who's coming from Ashland. And so ultimately you found loggerheads in the theory or the implementation of the will of the voters to begin with. So the foundation was always a bit rocky. You've got a relationship here between individual members of the House and individual members of the Senate in a committee that got together and then broke up and then went on a couple dates and then decided they didn't want to see each other anymore. Yeah, and then the Senate went off, and I think Peter Buckley characterized it in one of the best ways, which was you didn't just take your ball and go home, you also took our ball and went home when the Senate formed their own Senate Special Committee and passed a bill that was 964. There were only about 3,000 bills this session, so 964, and passed the darn thing through, which of course then it had to go
29 to 1.
29 to 1. We had Floyd Przansky as the lone one no vote. But then, of course, it had to go to the House, and the House wasn't going to pass it. That was the reason the Senate had to peel off to have their own vote to begin with. So you already knew that conversation was a bit doomed. At some point after the Senate had its pro forma hearing and passed that bill out, then they all met literally one moment after. And the Joint Committee was reformed, and the conversation shifted and began to be about recreational. And I'm very excited to be sitting in between these two guys, because what you have are these staunch long-term voices of the two pieces of this movement, which is the medical and the patients, and the recreational and the retail. And I think, not to pass it off too early, Russ, let me know, but I think each piece of this was so key in what we had as the outcome. And of course, were also key roadblocks along the way, the formation of the medical or the undoing of the medical, and the formation of the recreational and undoing of the recreational.
So if I could follow up on something you said, you mentioned, it's a different will of the voters for Senator Ted Ferrioli in the East versus Ken Helm in Metro Portland. What about Senator Ginny Burdick? Her district voted like 71% in favor of Measure 91.
Well, we had the opportunity to meet with and talk with Senator Burdick, of course, many times over the course of the legislative session. And I think what I would say is she came from a place where this was not in her vernacular, and this was not in her world. And she also came from the Finance and Revenue Committee. She was chair of the money for a while, and what we were going to get in the state and how it was going to work out, the accounting and the money for the revenue for the state of Oregon. And so this was an entirely new world for her. And I think for somebody who started from scratch and somebody who wanted to really, quote unquote, thread the needle between the two sides, if you will, having a long relationship with law enforcement, and then also understanding that this is in part thanks to the advocacy of these guys at the table, the understanding that this is a legitimate industry, that this is a necessary medical module for patients. And I think all in all, she did a really great job, although there was a lot of education involved, and not just for Senator Burdick, but for many of the members on the committee. When you have folks that are steeped in this issue, they can sometimes be just as hard to educate or move or shape as somebody who's not used to it at all.
All right, so some of it's just cultural, some of it's just education, have these people not being familiar with the subject and sometimes working off their worst fears rather than what science or experience might show us. But as time goes on, they're going to understand that the sky's not falling, and they'll be a little less reticent to be supportive and support good reforms. Now, let's talk to Dawn. Dawn Morris, you've been involved, like I said, on the retail side and working on the consumer side for a long time. What do you see in 3400? Is there anything there that gives you concern for our future versus anything that makes you think, oh my God, Oregon is going to blow up, we're going to be amazing here?
Well, I think the major thing with 3400 was how is the state going to blend the medical program with the retail program? And I think a lot of the concessions that were made on behalf of medical patients and the changes were to facilitate a healthy and robust, trackable retail system. That said, the major concern that I have with 3400 is that we're going to be taxing medical patients in retail stores. I think that this is a huge mistake, but it's being done as a way to encourage medical patients to shop in medical-only stores for medically sourced marijuana. But what happens when that dries up and they don't have access to what they need? They're going to have to go, patients are going to have to go to the retail store to get it, because that's where the majority of marijuana is going to be. And at that point, they're going to be taxed. So see that as a big problem. There were a lot of aspects of 3400 I think that the medical patients are bearing the brunt of. And we have to concede to a lot of things because we have to have just one system eventually in the state. You can't have two. And there are people, the state is divided north and south. They have different ideas of where we need to go as an industry. But at the end of the day, within a year or so, we need to bring it all into one system. But we can't forget where we started, which was with the medical patients. I mean, that was 17 years ago? And we've had medical dispensaries now by virtue of 3460 for a year and a half, 2 years. And I think it's going to be a mistake if we just leave the medical patients hanging. And that was probably the biggest shortcoming of 3400.
Now let's break this down. We'll bring Anthony in on this discussion as well, in case we got some new folks that have come in, and just to make clear what we're talking about as far as the taxation. Governor Kate Brown just Tuesday signed the SB 460, which is the bill that says the currently existing medical marijuana dispensaries, the 3460s, the dispensaries that are out there right now, can start selling to adult patients, or all adults, 21 and over, starting on October 1st. It's up to their discretion. They don't have to, but they can. And cities have the option of whether or not that's going to be allowed. But here in Portland, it's going to happen. So we've got, 93 dispensaries in Portland, I think now, and many more applications. And starting October 1st, the sales will begin. And those sales will be tax-free. Measure 91 didn't give any authority for taxation until 2016. So for October through December, we're going to have tax-free marijuana sales for everyone in the state of Oregon. So get your Christmas shopping done early. Then after January 4th, a new temporary tax kicks in at the medical locations that's 25% on the adult purchasers that can only get a quarter ounce at a time, but not the medical ones, right? That 25%
Correct.
Doesn't go to the medical ones. Then eventually, there's going to be recreational stores, sometime in late summer, probably early fall 2016. When those exist, they'll start charging a 17% state tax and up to a 3% local tax if that locality allows all 4 types of licenses. Those taxes will remain at the recreational store for everyone who purchases there, whether they're a patient or not. The existing medical stores will continue to not charge taxes, except that 25% to the adults who come in. But again, once a recreational store comes in, why are you going to walk into a place that's a 25% tax when there's a one across the street that's 20% tax? As of the end of 2016, that temporary 25% tax goes away, and if I'm not mistaken, they go to just being medical stores at that point. Is that right?
Correct.
So they no longer can serve adults. The idea being, we gave you this temporary time to get in there, we charged you 25%, now go to your rec store. The concern Don brings up, and it's something we discussed privately yesterday as we were getting ready for this panel, is what happens to the market of marijuana? Because as the Supreme Court once famously said, marijuana is fungible. It's the same thing whether a patient's smoking it or I'm smoking it or a Rastafarian smoking it. It doesn't change, it's the same product. Now there are specific products that are more medical in nature, like the high CBD stuff and so forth. But generally speaking, marijuana is marijuana. So if you're a store owner and you have the choice of being a store owner who sells to 70,000 potential customers versus a recreational store owner who's selling to 300,000 or 400,000 plus tourists, most of the market's going to jump over there where the money's at, where all the customers are. So what's going to be left for the medical? And as Don said, part of the idea of the tax was, the medical places will be tax-free, and so that will leave the patients over that direction, but not if there aren't any left to go to. And the other consideration is consider what's going to happen to the patient rolls once recreational stores start to exist and people have the right to grow 4 plants. For some people, it's not going to be worth it to get that $200 card. It's not going to be worth it to pay the state for protection anymore. They can buy up to an ounce and grow up to 4 plants, and for some patients that might be enough. So the patients who will be left are the most desperate patients, are the cancer patients, the hospice patients, the AIDS patients, who do need more and usually are on disability, can't afford to go pay 17% tax at a recreational store. So that kind of sets the stage, and excuse me for going a little long, but Anthony, that sets the stage. Give us your perspective on this and maybe other aspects of 3400 that have you concerned.
Well, this is 3400, and it has all the aspects in here that I'm concerned about. And it starts on page 1 and goes to page 114, 111. I think the patients got some good things in this bill, and then I think they got left behind to a certain extent in this bill as well. One of the things that most of the patients are worried about is having to report what they're doing to the state, and then having to allow the state to inspect their gardens. There is some safeguards in there. If you're growing just for yourself, or if you're growing in an address where no more than 12 plants are being grown at, you won't have to report, but you also won't be able to sell your excess to a dispensary. And there's a lot of things that changed in that equation for people to sell their excess to a dispensary. And one of the biggest things, I think, is the 12 pound per plant limit that you're now allowed to possess. So a person growing for themselves can legally possess the 72 pounds that they may produce. So it kind of takes excess away in a sense because you're legally allowed to possess it. So it's not really excess. It is excess in that the patient isn't going to smoke 72 pounds if that's what you produce, but it does allow you some protection. The other thing is now that in order to be designated as a person to grow for somebody else, you have to be a 2-year resident of Oregon and you have to be 21 years of age. That wasn't the case before. The OHA did require some proof of residency like an electric bill or something of that nature, and you could do it at the age of 18, so that has changed. Then how the plant limits work for everybody that kicks in on March 1st of next year, nobody is going to be allowed to grow for any more than 16 patients. So those 48 or 50 people that are growing for more than 16 patients right now, they got to pare it down to 16 patients. So that leaves about 2,000 patients looking for a grower come March 1st. And that's just for the over 16. If there's somebody that's growing for 12 patients, but they're in an area where they're only allowed to grow 48 plants, they got to scale back. So we're going to lose some growers for patients there. So this is a big concern for us as patient advocates as to what these people are going to do for their medicine that they are currently probably getting for pretty close to zero. I think there's a place in Oregon for both systems to exist, the medical and the recreational, and I think they will continue to exist side by side for a number of years. And I think the program will stay in place until such time as steps are taken to integrate the therapeutic benefits of cannabis into the overall healthcare landscape in Oregon. And that's what we're going to be working on over the next couple of sessions to kind of establish the foundation so that that transition can happen. Because over the next few years, people, since it's legal now, are going to be asking their physicians about cannabis. Hey, I heard that marijuana will keep you from throwing up when I start my chemotherapy next Thursday. And the doctors can't really do anything, so we want to raise the level of and competency of the clinics so that a normal physician in Health Net coverage area can refer them to a marijuana clinic where they can talk to a doctor about marijuana and how it works and get them a card if they feel like they need one. So these changes are going to have to take place before the program can really be allowed to dissolve into the recreational market, if you will.
All right, thank you. And if I could follow up, when you mentioned the limits on patients, so this is like the new grows that come into effect, if they're in a residential area, can only have maximum of 12 plants, in a non-residential maximum of 48. Is there a limit on patients, or is it that someone who might have been serving 4 patients with 6 plants apiece could now only serve 4 patients with 3 plants apiece? They wouldn't have to drop patients, would they? They just have to decrease how many plants each patient's getting.
That is an option, but you are still restricted to only growing for 4 patients.
Right, and wasn't that what it was for per grower?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and you can, and the language reads up to 6 plants. So, to address your question, now you can grow for 6 plant patients with 24 plants, for instance.
Okay. And there's some other good things in there. The whole getting rid of the 12-inch rule for an immature plant, that's no longer in effect. If it's not budding, it's immature. And I know on the rec side, they said that there's going to be no canopy number or weight limits on the production of immature plants.
That's on the medical side.
And that's on the medical side as well. Isn't that a great boon to patients in being able to not have to count seedlings or, oh my God, they grew 2 inches over the weekend? All right, we've got a great opportunity here to ask these folks questions. We got Don and Nikki and Anthony. And if you have a question, I'll just come out here Phil Donahue style. See, I'm dating myself with that Phil Donahue reference, but okay.
Hi, as I listen to you, I'm just thinking of ways that people are likely to be creative to get around some of these provisions. And what I'm wondering is, on the plant limits, the sizes, et cetera, what would stop me from say, buying futures in someone else's operation, or setting up a minority stake in their business, or setting up multiple LLCs to kind of redefine the parameters that have been outlined for me. Bonding warehouses, I mean, there are all these standards that have been around for decades in the liquor industry. Like, I'm thinking whiskey and bourbon, they've been around for, what, 300 years or so.
There's absolutely nothing to prevent you from investing in multiple businesses, as you
So
described.
could I get access to additional product through that route, though, is where I'm going, hypothetically.
What do you mean by access to the product?
Well, let's say I'm only limited to grow X number of plants, and then you have an operation and I decide to invest in the futures of what your capacity. Does that in turn give me access to additional product outside the boundary conditions that have been set?
Well,
by
yeah,
law?
each business is unto itself. I mean, they have a limit. So if you establish a grow operation using medical cards, you can stack to whatever the limit is going to allow you in that case. If you're operating a grow operation under OLCC guidelines, either medically or by virtue of an OLCC license, then that's its own entity. And so by having access, I guess you mean you have a dispensary and you want things to flow to you. That's up to each grow operation as to where the final product goes.
So it sounds like the product could be very fluid in terms of where it goes, even with the restrictions that are in place.
It's a free market. I mean, as long as the stuff is accounted for within the state's database that they've yet to decide how that's going to go. Yeah. But as long as it's accounted for, it doesn't matter who it goes to. So if you want to earmark each of your investments towards your dispensary, you certainly can do that.
The way I understood it or heard it explained one time is we have no tied house or vertical integration limits, right? Like when they did Colorado, it was kind of tied. It's like you had to grow 70% of what you sold. Washington State was kind of the opposite. You couldn't be a grower and a seller at the same time. Oregon, we're like, you can have all 4 licenses, you can have 4 of the same license, you can have 16 of that and 2 of that, if you qualify, if you apply, and so forth. But I think that's what's going to make us, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably the best free market in recreational cannabis in the country.
Well, I agree. The only problem with that, there were a lot of protectionist things put into 3400. So while you can be vertically integrated, you can't exceed, as a grower, for instance, you can't exceed whatever's going to be allowed as a canopy limit. So you can't stack licenses in the same location. There are people who've bought 40, 50, 60,000 square foot warehouses thinking, oh, I'm going to grow in all of it. Well, you can't. Legally, it says 1 license per physical address. So if you're at a 5,000 canopy limit and you've got a 60,000 square foot building, what are you going to do with the other 50,000 square feet of that building? So that's the only limit that's been placed on Oregonians as far as the development of the industry. So if you have vertical integration, you can take that 60,000 square foot building and you can grow in 5 or 10,000 square feet. You can process and do concentrates in another 5,000. You can set up a kitchen and do medibles over here. You can run a nursery, and you can also get a license and run a research facility. So there are a lot of ways to fill that business, but you're not going to be able to focus on just one aspect and grow to the max. And that was something that was very important to a lot of people at the table, that we didn't want big companies, Philip Morris, whatever, coming in and just growing en masse and taking over the market. So that's why we have that
And
difference.
You got to follow up on the politics of that?
Well, the politics.
We're not supposed to discuss politics or religions.
Right. Well, I wanted to just underscore something that Don said, which I thought was really important and very key, which was this was how they were allowing or limiting, depending on your perspective, for Oregonians. Those are folks that are in state. There are going to be residency requirements for investors as well. So you may have an investor at a certain level, and it's yet to be determined, but at a certain level, and they will have to go through a background check. And it's not going to be federal and fingerprints, et cetera. But so if you're looking at trying to find a way to establish 5 different avenues for investment into one particular place, you're going to want to look at what level of investment you have, who are your backers, and where does that money come from, because the government is going to be looking at that. OLCC will be looking at that. And it may not be as simple as throwing up some drywall to partition off 5 to 6, 10,000 square foot pieces of a major warehouse. They're, I think, trying to give a lot of room for the Oregon businesses to grow, right? Give that Oregon head start. But they're, I think you all may have heard it yesterday directly from the mouth of Steve Marks, they're not going to be kind of just rolling over. They'll be watching and paying attention. And to the politics of it, Russ, I would just say where we all felt that in the legislative process, we were giving a lot of room for industry and experts to advise the agency on building what was going to be the best system by kicking a lot of things to rules. We sat in a room, there was a handful of folks, there were now 30 to 35 advocates overall for the industry and for the movement down in Salem on a day-to-day basis. And we all sat in a room at least once a week and tried to determine what was best to be left in rules so that the industry could weigh in. And these guys can probably tell you, and if you're watching at all the OLCC rulemaking and the regulatory aspect of things, that that didn't pan out the way that we maybe thought that it would. So the politics of it, I could use a pretty dirty word.
There's the old metaphor about making sausage.
Yeah, that's probably a nicer way of saying it. But it's something to still keep watching, and it's something to continue to think creatively about, and I think that's going to be one way to ensure that that Oregon Head Start doesn't get stifled by the translation between legislation and regulation.
Anthony, did you have anything to add on that?
Well, I was just going to say it was really interesting dynamics for everybody that went into session looking for a vision, that we could hold up to the rest of the country, and ending up with a half-assed version of what, the co-chairs thought would be best for everybody, and all the political trading and horse trading that was going on, and bargaining and holding one thing or another hostage. But I think that the Measure 91 committee did a great disservice to this state initially by trying to rein in medical and misinterpreting the Cole memo in an effort to do that. And I think it put the committee way behind. And when it come to really discussing the issues and having public input, they ran out of time. It's like they were 3 touchdowns behind going into the fourth quarter and had a chance to throw a game-winning touchdown in the last 30 seconds, and they kind of dropped the ball on the whole thing. And so we got this mishmash of trying to combine this medical and recreational rather than going in and doing what their title suggested they should be doing, implementing Measure 91. And there were a lot of us that thought it would be best to have both systems exist side by side, don't do anything with 91 or with medical, and implement 91 and let them run for a couple of years, then make the decisions about what needs to be mixed or melded or left separate. And I think that's one of the things that this early sales is going to allow us to do, is get a snapshot of what that market's going to be like. I think it's unconscionable on the part of the OLCC to say they're not going to allow any stores to be opened up until October or late 2016. I mean, there's a rule in their alcohol rules where they're required they can take up to 45 days to issue a license, but they can take no more than 90 days to get that license issued. And now we're saying that they have to start taking applications in January, but they're not going to issue any retail store licenses until October. That's kind of the impetus behind the October 1 rollout, and why there was this kind of strange coalition of Republicans and Democrats to make that happen, really thankful, and I just really hope that they take a really close look at what the data is going to show them from October till January, and then mold their their retail stores with that data in mind.
Thanks, Anthony. And it reminds me that marijuana is unique in its ability to addle the brains of those who do not use it. How hard is this to regulate? We've already regulated cigars and alcohol. We should have had this figured out by now.
Well, it's disappointing, and we saw Tom Burns do it, and we saw Ginny Burdick do it. I saw from the chair of the Rules Advisory Committee when they were talking about child care rules and marijuana. When these chair people that are tasked with implementing these programs announce to the world that they know absolutely nothing about marijuana, so let's get started. And it gave us a huge task in the learning curve to bring these people up to speed so they could even begin to understand the medical program and how it works with the growers and the caregivers. They took caregivers away as being able to grow cannabis. So now all those people that are carded up with caregiver cards because you're allowed to grow as a caregiver under the existing rules, that's not going to happen as of March 1st. You got to get rid of all those caregiver plants because they're not allowed to grow anymore. So it's taken us a few weeks. I still haven't sorted all the things out that the patients and designated growers for those patients are going to have to deal with. It's going to be interesting.
We do have a question, but did you have a quick follow-up?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the political interest of different factions of our industry came into play here. And as Anthony said, we were in the process of educating the 91 committee because some of them lacked a lot of knowledge about marijuana. And we were able to bring them over to our side, and they understood that it wasn't what they thought it was and how it should be regulated and whatnot. But different factions within our industry made power plays that affected how 3400 was written. And so there's a lot that we need to look amongst ourselves and say, what did we do? How did we end up with what we have? And it's because of self-interest with different groups throughout the state. And I think that's an important thing to note. You can't lay all of the blame for what you don't like about 3400 at the feet of the legislature. You need to look at who made that happen and why that happened.
When they came into the session, they had already received a lot of information that was less than accurate, and that kind of molded their decision to approach it first with trying to get a handle on the medical, because they thought the medical growers were responsible for the millions of pounds that was being exported from this state.
Right.
And failed to consider any of the illegal grows that are operating in this state under the cover of the program. They don't have cards, they just know that they're in Southeast Portland and they could have 5 houses on the same street growing marijuana, and nobody's ever going to discover it unless somebody calls in a complaint. And they roll up on the address and say, oh, it smells like marijuana, is this a licensed address? And if it's not, but that just doesn't happen in Multnomah County for sure. And so there's a lot of dynamics at play, but now somebody that's growing for 16 patients can legally possess 1,152 pounds of weed. So there's got to be some silver lining.
That right there is an example of the influences of, I see it different. I see it as the influence of different groups. We have outdoor growers in one hand saying, oh, an outdoor plant, 4 pounds maybe. Yet, I'm pretty certain that the rule that ended up allowing them to have 12 pounds was by those influenced by those outdoor growers who want the protection because they know some of their plants do grow 12 pounds. And it's misleading information and who's doing what and how. But at the end of the day, the industry is going to move forward. I believe all parties involved, the OLCC, the legislature, and such, see that it's going to end up being one business, one industry, not medical and retail. I think of it like, why do people drink almond milk? they either like it or they have an allergy to dairy. And it's kind of the same with marijuana. Marijuana is marijuana. And some people are going to use it because they like it, and some people are going to use it because it's their medicine or it addresses some deficiency in their body. So it's kind of the same thing. But at the end of the day, it's all one product. And eventually we need to treat it that way. We don't need medically sourced and retail sourced and all these factions coming into play. It needs to be one industry, one product from seed to sale.
And if it's being sold at a store and someone shows you a medical marijuana card, don't push that tax button.
Exactly.
How hard is that? Let's get to the question because you've been so patient.
No, that's perfect. That was my question.
Oh.
And it's only temporary. It's really until probably next October. But how is it even going to be regulated for the taxes, right? So, okay, you're going into one establishment and maybe you have your medical card. And then there's somebody who doesn't, and how is that really going to be? My background's like finance. I'm just wondering, it just seems so easy to avoid that tax.
Well, you have to have the card to avoid that tax. And if you have a card, and I own a medical dispensary, we have to take all your information. If you're a patient in my dispensary, I can look up your name and I can tell everything you've bought since the first time you came to my dispensary. Everything is recorded, and that information is available to the state. So in theory, what they can do if there's let's say there's a disproportionate amount of untaxed sales going on, they can come in and audit.
Okay.
And all the people that we sold to with a card, they've got to be in there and logged.
So then it would all just reconcile that.
Exactly, because if I'm selling to recreational people without a tax, all that information needs to be in my system as though they had a card, but the card also has to be attached to that file.
Okay.
So if they audit me, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Well, and that information is also available to law enforcement and to cities and county regulatory agencies.
Okay.
All that data. The data is kind of an interesting thing in all this because, a lot of the patients came in and said, if we let you do this, you have to make sure, promise us and guarantee us that there is a firewall between data mining and the personal information that the patients release to the Oregon Health Authority. And so once we got that insurance, we kind of let it roll. But this data is going to be huge for everybody. I'm really interested to find out what the dispensary's data looks like after a year or so in the business and what that tells us about patients, the market in general, and what we may expect in the future. It also tells us, it has all kinds of epidemiological aspects to it, because now you can mine that and say, well, the 18 to 24 age group is buying predominantly concentrates, and the 60 to 64 is buying predominantly medibles, and you can tailor your branding and your marketing to that, and the state agencies can re-examine the taxes and the revenues and all that sort of stuff, as well as have a real feeling for what's going on, and that in its whole really helps to satisfy the Cole memo, which has got everybody all shook up. But so you can point to and say, well, look, we have this law and this administrative rule that says that there's no leakage going on. So, but mining that data is going to be really helpful for patients, consumers, and state agencies.
Within that data, we've had medical marijuana since 1998, and as far as I'm aware, we haven't yet ever asked patients, is it working? Is there data like that we can actually get that sort of stuff, or is it just numbers, demo kind of stuff?
I think it's going to be that. The Oregon Health Authority never really has, even though they're tasked with supporting research on the medical uses of controlled substances by statute, they've never really set up a program, and it's been consistently hard for us to even pull the data out of the OMMP that is available. It wasn't until the 91 committee sat down and started looking at how the program works, that the program finally provided a snapshot, and they broke it down, how many addresses, cards per address, how many single addresses are growing for how many single patients, all that sort of stuff, and the age breakdown, so that they could identify some of the data so that they could help formulate their legislative decisions. But I'm really looking forward to a lot of the data, and I am guardedly optimistic about them safeguarding the personal information that applies to your debilitating condition.
As long as we don't get hacked like Ashley Madison, we should be fine.
Well, the data is very inconsistent. Some of it's because of advocates within our movement here, and that's because they wanted the information kept private, and they cited HIPAA rules, it's medical marijuana, things like that. So we have not been able to share what you buy, what proportion of concentrates versus flower versus edibles, etc. So they haven't been able to mine the data efficiently. So that's one thing. And with retail sales, we are not required even to record your name. It's just a retail sale, like you went into Walmart and you made a purchase. So again, it's going to be difficult for us to say, well, between 18 and 24-year-olds are predominantly buying this or that. There's really no way to know. We would have to take your license information and so on. Within my own company, the board of directors this week had a very heated conversation about whether or not we were going to mine data like that and require people, for instance, if you came into my dispensary, I want your name, your email address, and your date of birth, just for my own marketing purposes, and be able to track things that way. But that's a very limited thing, that the state's not going to be able to get involved with that and determine on a broader sense who's getting what and when and why.
All right, well, let's get to a question we have over here.
Yep, I'm pretty loud.
Okay.
So you kind of answered my question anyways, but is there going to be a restriction on how much information you get from people that are coming in for just rec sales?
You don't have to give any information.
Well,
So
age verification.
Yeah.
And the OLCC, the agency, has committed to not kind of recording any data that comes with it. If you go into a restaurant or a bar and they maybe scan your license, boop, that machine there, they will probably, I think most likely, mandate that a retail shop implements systems like that. They have said that they will look at a way to fund the purchase of those systems or to give you those systems with your license. In my mind, that just means your license will go up by that amount.
All right, we have a question here.
So a lot of the focus has been the tax at the point of sale. Say you're a vendor, is there going to be any tax when you're going into a shop selling your product and you're getting your price for that?
No.
And secondly, when cities are banning medical or recreational businesses, does that include production or is that only retail?
Depends.
It can be all four license types.
Right.
And dispensaries and OHA processing sites. I just wanted to add to Dawn's no on the taxes for vendors coming into the shops. If you're running your business in a normal business manner, you're going to 1099 all your vendors for the purpose eventually of being able to deduct that expense on your taxes. But if I was a dispensary owner, I'd be 1099ing all of my vendors, and I'd be making them fill out the paperwork. And I can't claim it right now, but that's how it really works in the real world. If you're a vendor of anything, at the end of the year, you fill out your taxes and you pay taxes on your profit, that you made, and that's kind of how it's going to work for vendors too. I mean, they can't deduct anything, but it becomes part of the tax record.
We are in the quote-unquote real world now.
Yeah. And that applies with all the regulations. You're going to have to bolt your processing, your closed loop system for, BHO to the floor, and you're gonna have the fire marshal come in and inspect and make sure, and DEQ's gonna come in and say, what are you doing with your wastewater or your waste chemicals? What's happening to that butane that you just blew through your weed? How much of it did you save? What happened to it? How did you dispose of it? All those things of the real business world are gonna come into play, and it's gonna take some of the folks out of the market. They won't be able to afford it.
Packaging, labeling requirements, lab testing, lab standards, lab equipment standards. I mean, every point along the way from, as we like to say, seed to sale, and I really think even, for me, clone to sale, harvest to home, whatever you want to use for it, at every point along the way, there are going to be regulations. And that's, I guess, is just a note for all of us in the industry, for everyone in the industry. You're going to have more than one agency to grapple with. Right. There were at the table the Oregon Nurseries Associations, the Department of Ag, the Farm Bureau. I mean, folks were really looking at the broad spectrum of regulation, and it is down to the food and manufacturing processes.
For instance, you can have a processor's license. An Oregon Health Authority issued processor's license starting March. In March, you can submit an application. Now, you can have that license if your facility is in a residential area, as long as you're not processing extracts. So technically, as a medibles producer, you can have, if you can get the Department of Ag to do it, a certified home kitchen to produce your medibles in for sale.
Right.
Now it'll be a little tricky because you're going to have cameras in your kitchen.
Right.
And everything has to follow the rules. And the point is that all these businesses, and that was the big thing with the medibles, is why are we making all these rules? The Department of Ag and the OHA already under statute control this. Let's just add the word marijuana where it's necessary. Deal with the security issues surrounding, the intake and distribution of the cannabis itself and the cannabis products as an end product, and get on with things.
Yeah, but what a lot of people don't understand is 3400 and the other bills that were passed just set the framework. It's like a skeleton. And now we have all these rules committees, and they're fleshing this out. And, they could turn around and say, well, edibles could only be made in a commercial kitchen.
Right.
So right away, your home kitchen is out the door. Now, where do you find a commercial kitchen? One of the discussions we're having right now is, can different small businesses share a single commercial kitchen? Because a commercial kitchen can cost $200,000, $300,000 to establish. All the stainless steel, the hood, the ovens, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of places that have operated in a commercial kitchen where Monday it's this company, Tuesday it's that company, and so on. And they share it because they are small businesses and growing and can't afford to build their own $300,000 kitchen yet.
But Don, that opens up the opportunity for leakage.
This
is, right, I think it's very easy for us as members of the industry to think about this from one perspective, which is our perspective, which is a fine perspective. But there are then additionally around the table, law enforcement, district attorneys, angry moms. So you've got a whole panel of opinions, strong opinions, just like ours, to kind of weave into the overall policy. And so if you're forced into a commercial kitchen, should it be that you're sharing these businesses only with other medical, edible, or infused manufacturing processes? Because on Tuesday, you might get some of the best salsa you've ever had. If on Monday, somebody else is in there in your kitchen.
All right, well, we have to wrap things up. Does anyone have a question before we go to closing statements? All right, let's get one last question, and then we'll wrap things up.
Sorry, back to the taxation question about as far as write-offs for producers. As far as all of the costs of going into producing the product, will that be allowable? Will they allow that to have to be written off?
Within the state of Oregon on your state taxes, yes. Federal taxes, no.
No, federal taxes you can. If it's your cost of goods sold, you can. I specialize in 280E.
Okay.
Yeah. So you so anything.
Are different.
No, like startup costs is a little bit different, but basically your main thing is you just want to make sure that anything that's related to getting that, for a producer you're fine, right? So to getting that to a sale. So obviously your business expenses, your payroll, you can, but the purchasing of the product to sell, you can.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of people don't think that, and I'm like, no, that's the one thing you can. At first you couldn't when a 280 was established, but now since I think the last 15 years. So that's one thing.
If you wanted.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like that's the one. Okay, that's the one business thing. I'm like, you can. Yeah. So.
Well, I want to thank everyone who came out here early in the morning on a Thursday. Of course, is the coolest part of the day. Let's give a round for our panel. Thank you. And just quick closing thoughts, Don.
We're at a point where we need the involvement of everyone in the audience. We've done almost as much as we can on the state level. We've got other things to do and other agendas, but we can help you town by town, county by county, advising you what needs to be done to advance the cause of cannabis. But it's really at a point now where we're at a tipping point. We need your involvement on a local level. And that's going to be key in what happens in the next couple of years.
Join OCBC. That's the first one.
Yeah.
I can do a shameless plug, can't I? At the end.
Or compassionate or.
Oh, right. Yes. Maybe both. I think I would just like to say that I think people don't realize truly how accessible the state legislature is. Your state government is, and in particular in Oregon, and other states maybe not, but here it's so friendly and folksy, and the door is really open to people who need to advocate and who need help or are looking for an avenue to progress in their business. And it's one of the reasons that Anthony, found 30 friends this legislative session. Think about who your legislator is. Find out who your legislator is. Go to OregonLegislature.gov and put in your address. It will tell you who your state senator is. It will tell you who your state representative is. They're going to have office hours. They're going to have coffees. They're going to have town halls. Go and talk with them and let us know and participate with us in those conversations. We can help you with what it is to say or maybe how to say it. It's really, truly easier than you think it is, and that relationship is a golden nugget to the progression of this industry. That is going to be how we continue to move forward in a positive and friendly fashion and take the industry out of, not just business-wise, out of the gray, but remove that stereotype. We're not just a bunch of hippie stoners anymore, or maybe we never were. They never knew, and they have to learn that, and the best way to teach them that is by being present and speaking up.
I've lobbied legislators in Idaho and Georgia. You are so correct on Oregon being accessible, let me tell you.
No, I would second that wholeheartedly. These legislators, the senators and representatives, really do have open door policies, and they really will listen to you, and they will introduce legislation at your request if you can make your case. And so it's really important to stay involved at the state level, but at this point, to second Don, it is really important at the local level because the Umpqua Cannabis Association rolled back the city of Roseburg, tabled their motion to ban everything. So it's really important to stay active locally. The other thing I would say, 3400 gives everybody huge opportunities, and I think it will change the face of marijuana in Oregon, mostly for the good part. So, just in closing, make sure you're familiar with it. The Dalai Lama says, know the rules.
Well, folks, that's all we've got for today's show. Great highlights from the Cannabis Creative Conference. And if you want to catch the rest of them, they're posted up at my SoundCloud page, soundcloud.com/RadicalRuss. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and interviews you can use for the cannabis community here on the Russ Belville Show. Thanks for supporting us. You can become a 420 Radio VIP supporter. Just log on to 420radio.org/donate. And keep in mind that next weekend is the Seattle Hemp Fest. That's right, Seattle Hemp Fest, August 14th, 15th, and 16th. We'll be up there with Herb Thrasher, getting you lots of recorded interviews and all sorts of fun videos on our new Periscope account. Follow me on Periscope at Radical Russ. For everyone here at Rolla J Studios in beautiful legal Portland, Oregon, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.